Hello, this is a review of the book Learner-Centered Teaching: 5 Key Changes to Practice by Maryellen Weimer. This review will include an overview of content, discussion of philosophical foundations, and an analysis of utility. The word cloud on this slide was created by using all of the words within my book review. I hope you enjoy. Weimer starts off the book with a discussion of the title, Learner-Centered Teaching. I think it's important to share her discussion as it's a topic currently debated within the higher education community. Learner-centered is also referred to as student-centered. The discussion can get controversial when we think of students as the customer. Should educators be trying to satisfy them? Are the student customers always right? And is education a product? While the discussion does have merit, it's not related to learner-centered teaching, and the focus should stay on the learners. Weimer describes learner-centered teaching as teaching focused on learning. What students are doing is the central focus of the teacher. She goes on to list 5 elements of learning-centered teaching, which include, number 1, it is teaching that engages students in the hard, messy work of learning. I think we've all heard Gail say this a time or two. Number 2, it is the teaching that motivates and empowers students by giving them some control over the learning process. Number 3, it is teaching that encourages collaboration, acknowledging the classroom as a community where everyone shares the learning agenda. Number 4, it is teaching that promotes students' reflection about what they are learning and how they are learning it. And finally, number 5, it is teaching that includes explicit learning skills instruction. Weimer argues that learner-centered teaching is tied to many different educational theories rather than described in literature as its own theory or philosophy. Attribution theory, self-efficacy, radical and critical pedagogy, feminist pedagogy, constructivism, and transformative learning all support the student-centered classroom approach. Attribution theory identifies what students attribute their success or failure to. When students try to explain an academic outcome, like how well they did or didn't do on an exam, they genuinely attribute it to either ability or effort. Ability is how competent they are, while effort is how hard they tried. Self-efficacy has to do with students' beliefs about their capabilities. In order to build self-efficacy, students need to be in learning situations that construe ability as an acquirable skill, de-emphasize competitive social comparison, and highlight self-comparison of progress and personal accomplishments, and 3, reinforce the individual student's ability to exercise some control over the learning environment. Radical pedagogy challenges many common assumptions about who is responsible for what in the teaching-learning process. The theory also questions the role of the teacher authority and challenges teachers to explore ways of sharing power with their students. The pedagogy changes the power dynamic in the classroom for the benefit of student learning. Feminist pedagogy is about changing the dynamic and power within a classroom, however, it is more related to the teachers than the students. This theory is similar to the radical pedagogy and also finds that the power within a classroom is not equally distributed and the imbalance negatively affects learning outcomes, especially for women. This theory argues that because higher education has historically been dominated by males, students, typically females, are treated differently. Their learning is inhibited by power structures that protect the powerful. Feminist pedagogy also critiques the competitive aspect of education, suggesting education does a much better job of teaching students to compete than to cooperate. Constructivism is a core theory of the learner-centered teaching approach and emphasizes learners actively constructing their own knowledge rather than passively receiving information transmitted to them from teachers and textbooks. Constructivism requires invention and self-organization on the part of the learner. The teacher needs to allow the learners to raise their own questions. Transformative learning is believed to be based on constructivism assumptions. Weimer believes that transformative learning should be the ultimate objective for all education, especially within higher education. Transformative learning changes what people believe, how they act, and potentially who they are. The transformative changes are profound, deep, and long lasting. Mesereau explains that learning can be triggered by a single event referred to as a disorienting dilemma, or it can take place more gradually. The first change, the role of the teacher, has to do with the fact that in a typical classroom, the teacher leads the discussion, previews and reviews materials, delivers the content, offers examples, asks and answers most questions, calls on the students, solves the problems, provides the graphs, and moderates the discussion. Students are usually there, however, they are allowed to take a passive role and observe. The idea of changing the role of the teacher is to facilitate or support the learning efforts of the student and allow the students not only to engage but become active and responsible for their learning. Within the balance of power, Weimer shares just how much power a teacher has within the classroom. This power includes deciding what content students will learn, controlling the pace at which the content is covered, creating a schedule for the course, deciding what learning activities will be covered, establishing course policies, due dates, attendance points, regulating the flow of communication, and most importantly, deciding how well students have or have not learned the material. Shifting the balance of power does not mean teachers lose their power, but rather share with their students. The ultimate decision falls to the instructor. However, students are active participants in the process. Weimer passionately argues that what needs to change with the function of content has to do with our thinking about content, specifically the notion that it is something we cover. For example, how many times have you heard, "Today we will be covering X, Y, and Z"? She argues there needs to be a change because covering suggests something superficial rather than going into depth. Coverage does not necessarily equal learning, as teaching on its own never causes learning. Only successful attempts by the learner actually cause learning. The importance of this change is that without a shift, covering content is the responsibility of the teacher, while learning is the responsibility of the student. And when the teacher is covering the content, they are not concerned if the learner is learning. Weimer suggests that teachers have taken the responsibility out of learning. Policies and rules are created within a classroom to keep students obedient, earning points, and hopefully paying attention. Policies that mandate manner include mandatory attendance, penalties for missed deadlines, required participation. We prohibit talking, texting, eating, drinking, coming in late. We give assignment details such as how long the page should be, the length, the text, the margin, the font. We are bending over backwards to get students doing what learning requires. The change required for this topic is less obvious and harder to implement. Taking away all the policies one day will not work. Again, it is about a different way of thinking and creating a climate conducive to deep, long-lasting learning, asking students to become responsible for their own learning and education. The final change Weimer suggests is the purpose and process of an evaluation. While grades are important, learning should matter more. How long has it been since someone asked for your specific GPA? Grades do not measure whether a student can remember and apply content outside of the classroom. Grades often do not measure how well a student can work with others, how committed they are to ethical standards, or whether they value civic engagement. Finding alternate means to measure and grade students on the critical thinking skills we are attempting to teach them will ultimately benefit you and the student. This book could be used to enhance teaching within the classroom as well as learning for students. I would recommend all new instructors review these changes prior to building a course or teaching a course for the first time, as well as instructors who are currently teaching review these changes. After Weimer reviews the 5 essential changes, she shares examples and details from her own classroom, as well as strategies for implementation. Her book describes and breaks down each change within each chapter, also sharing where to expect resistance and how to troubleshoot such resistance.